Hello, my name is Sarah Paxton. I'm the Community Events Manager at Optimal Workshop. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Without further ado, I'd love to hand over to our presenters from Journey Digital.
Nice. Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting us here to talk today. We're super excited to get into some juicy topics. The contradictions of inclusivity. Why designing for everyone fails. I'm Ryan Campbell, Design Director, and I also have Johan here, our Senior Product Designer. We both work at Journey Digital, and we're agencies based in Auckland and London. We work across quite a few sectors, from aviation, healthcare, finance, logistics, and even travel more recently. At Journey, we do everything from apps, websites, dashboards, kiosks, anything with a screen, to be honest. We really love solving tricky user problems, user business and technology problems, sorry. We really find that sweet spot somewhere in the middle of those three worlds. Today, we're diving into the paradox of inclusive design. What we've found is that designing for everyone often fails despite our best intentions. We're not having that clear audience focus. You fail to deliver that truly great experience. A challenge that Johan and I are constantly talking about. So today we'll explore a few real-world contradictions. We'll talk to some real-life case studies. Unfortunately, we can't show the work. We'll just be talking to it, talking about what we've learned and some of those amazing outcomes we've had working in that space. What do we mean when we say inclusive design? Why designing with a one-size-fits-all fails? So picture this. You've received an exciting brief from a client. A shiny new project has just landed in your lap. Something truly challenging and unique, super exciting. Your mind starts racing with ideas. You're keen to get going. You want to start sketching. You want to start solving those problems and bringing it to life. But then that first burning question hits you. Who is the audience? Who are you designing for? And you're faced with the old adage, it's anyone. Could be anyone in the world. No specifics, no target demographics, from 16-year-olds to 90-year-olds and everyone in between. The device, could be a Microsoft Surface, could be an outdated Android phone with no connectivity. You could even be experiencing through a screen reader. With so many differing user groups, user needs, environmental challenges, how should you go about approaching that shiny new project? Where do you start? Maybe you start with standards.
Our decision-making is often guided by the so-called laws of UX. This is a valuable set of principles and heuristics that designers call upon often. We've got Hicks' law, Fitts, and Jacobs' law, and they're all guiding us to create predictable, user-friendly patterns so that our interfaces can feel intuitive. Hicks' law, for example, guides us to simplify choices so that we can help users make speedy decisions. But what about those advanced users that want more control? Fitts' law, on the other hand, guides us to optimize our touch target sizes to improve speed of use and accessibility, but it limits screen real estate and what we can display, especially on mobile devices. Strict adherence to these laws can be very limiting when done in the wrong way. And not every law benefits every user equally. So think of them as tools, not absolutes. These UX laws provide structure, but must be balanced with real user needs. Similarly, we've got brand guidelines. They ensure a cohesive brand experience, covering things like colors or fonts, the tone of voice or the messaging, and they help maintain this brand identity across different channels and user interactions. But rigid adherence to these things like brand colors may not meet contrast requirements, so especially for the visually impaired users. Prioritizing your brand over user needs can have negative outcomes as well. So while brand guidelines are vital, they need to be flexible to meet your user needs. Social media influencers often define visual and structural trends, or the so-called best practices. The all too familiar how to or stop doing type content constantly claim to define how we should approach everything from button design, spacing, color palettes, and even foundational tokens. But these parroted trend-based design practices often overlook actual user needs. They focus on aesthetics or consistency or even just design convenience. And these trends are inspiring and easy to apply, but must be adapted based on real user needs rather than just visual appeal. And trust me, your user needs should never be defined by somebody on TikTok. Lastly, we have the accessibility checklist. They ensure inclusive design, addressing needs for users with disabilities, and they offer essential guidelines for font sizes, contrast, navigation, and so much more. But strict adherence even to these can conflict with other user needs and even limit functionality. For example, content density on small screens are greatly impacted by these guidelines. The point we're trying to make is that all these guides and rules are, and best practices are very valuable, but should not be taken as laws or rules. There is not a one-size-fits-all solution. You need to be adaptable in your approach to understand your actual user needs.
Nice. So following from Johan, we try to design for everyone. We don't design well for anyone. The graph on the left, trying to illustrate that common pattern, whereas you expand that audience group, those audience groups and those user needs, the focus on that core experience and that quality is massively watered down. That experience of this focus, and no individual user gets a great experience. Widening that net really waters it down for all. Moving into the, spreading your experience too wide will even make your design the same as all the rest. Everything will feel the same. You move into that world of trends and UI and patterns that are used over and over again, creating an experience, just like the rest. Without that true user focus, you really won't design something that is particularly memorable, which is that sweet spot we're always trying to hit. What is that app or experience that you really remember? That's the key. Making something memorable makes something more sticky and better for all. So what do we champion? Going back to the U and UX, it does sound obvious, but it really is at the heart of UX and UI. So many rules to follow, wide ranges of audience, groups to adhere to. It's really hard. It's really easy to lose sight of who we are designing for. We believe in actively talking with those users, really getting it to the heart of what it is they're trying to achieve, what their needs are, what the tasks they're trying to complete. Observing their behaviours, finding those common themes to then use as guides when we're creating experiences to make sure everything is custom and kind of designed for those particular needs. And also not only once, we at Journey, it's all about benchmarking, designing, talking to users at a point in time, and then coming back swiftly to test again and reassess the impact that you've had with that more user-focused approach. User research early and often is at the heart of our approach here at Journey.
And using that approach, we've often found that design is more of a balancing act than sticking to rules and lists. Every design decision brings trade-offs, especially when servicing specific user needs rather than a broader audience. What works for some may cause frustration for others. Designers must navigate a complex balance between functionality, aesthetics, brand, experience, and accessibility. We'll look at 7 little contradictions that we've faced to highlight the need to step away from the prescribed list and rules. Each example shows a real-world case where contradicting guidelines would serve different user groups in a different way. And finding that balance between these guidelines and real user needs is challenging, but essential for meaningful design. First up, we have minimalist versus complex and informational. Minimalism design are often encouraged as it reduces the cognitive load for your users. It helps users focus on core functions and tasks and usually make things simple and easy to use. But not everyone is familiar with UI patterns. Elderly users, for example, may struggle without the additional visual written cues that minimalism tends to strip away. This leads to confusing or even frustration for those users. On the other hand, too much information can cause cognitive overload and reduce response times. So finding that balance means you need to talk to the people that will be using your product. We recently built an app specifically for 75-plus-year-olds that helped them kind of navigate their daily lives. This included features like booking in for events, or receiving updates and communication, and performing some other tasks as well. And we quickly noticed that a huge amount of people in this age group did not have the same pattern recognition than a teenager, for example, would have. They needed more information than other people may find redundant. So we added pictorial, verbal, and tactile layers of communication to all important elements. In plain English, it was an icon, a label, and a color instead of just a nice little chevron to indicate that you're moving forward. We actively steered away from minimalist approach and added cognitive load because it performed better when we conducted user testing. It clearly showed increased user confidence and reduced hesitation on task. So minimalism is valuable and can make things easier, but for specific group, additional design elements can provide the clarity that reduces the frustration they face.
Nice. So then the next contradiction, tooltips and help overlays versus a screen reader first approach. Helpful hints and instructional guides are usually encouraged for first-time users. A user using an experience for the first time, how do you easily get them through and instruct them and educate them as they go through? However, for recent experience we designed, we had to design for screen readers. So it was a really interesting project where we dived into the world of designing for screen reader. And what we found very quickly is that they're already getting a lot of hints, tips, instructions, education as they move through. Designing with sound and orientating with sound, you actually have to instruct as you go. I'd love to know if anyone here has actually experienced the web on a screen reader for an extended period of time. It's actually super jarring. For this project we worked on, it was the first thing we went to, designing for screen reader. There were lots of assumptions we had moving into this project, and they were quickly dispelled. Screen readers are actually really, really fast. Navigating with words rather than your eyes for layout is actually quite interesting, quite tricky, a massive challenge for us. So we recently worked on a project, a kiosk based in a busy airport, and what we were faced with was a really strict requirement to adhere to some aviation accessibility compliance, which actually made a really challenging brief for us. The audience was super wide, being in a busy airport, could be anyone. We really had to test against some specific user groups, blind, sight impaired, dyslexic, and we even talked to some people with Down syndrome. Very quickly, again, as I said before, we had a lot of assumptions and a lot of thoughts on how to do this, but they were just, as soon as we saw how those users interact with screens, it massively dispelled our first approach. What we decided is we needed a fresh new set of principles to guide us through this experience. With all of those challenges, not only was it with wide set of audiences with unique needs, but also being a physical kiosk, there was a lot of environmental challenges as well. Time of day was huge. There was also physical controls for people with lower sight to navigate through. So a lot of challenging restrictions in this brief. And what we came up with was a set of principles, as I said. We had to instruct, kind of best practice when designing for screen readers is to instruct at the start of every page and actually at most kind of blocks of content. You need to orientate people fairly quickly. Always let them know where they are. We had to design for tab controls. There's lots of intricacies around it in experience. We have different layers and hierarchies. We had to ensure that tabs were super clear and they didn't get lost. Another key thing we learned is that people who are used to screen readers are actually, they actually want the speech to be super fast. They don't like it being too slow, because you can imagine moving through something with sound, especially in a busy airport, you want to move at pace. Tone of voice was thrown out the window, no engaging brand speak. It was all about functional commentary. It was all about buttons and actions that were to the point and super, super minimal. Modal pop-ups, another thing that was just something that creates lots of disorientation, was out. And empathy for time was our key one. Every decision on every screen had to be slaved over to ensure that, time on page is minimal, not maximal, which is kind of the normal thing you aim for. So help overlays and tooltips can be beneficial for some experiences and some user groups. But when you're designing for screen readers, they're already in the world of instruction and hints and tips. So it can actually lead to more frustration if you're having to overly educate and prompt at the start of an experience. Nice. Contradiction, next contradiction, large touch targets versus screen real estate. Large touch targets aid users with motor impairments, but they can take up large, valuable screen space, particularly on lower end devices with small screens. We recently had a project where we were working with the lower socioeconomic brackets of society, and what we found through conversations of testing was that they're actually in an environment with devices with lower resolution, less real estate than normal, low connectivity as well. So data was huge, performance was huge, and limited screen real estate. Have you ever used one of those old or entry-level phones? There's so much we take for granted these days when we're if you're lucky enough to have a more modern Apple or Android device. So some of those key things we had to consider, speed of processing, connectivity, higher pixel density, lower pixel density, sorry, smooth interactions or no interactions, data uses and data storage. Some of those phones also had minimal data storage. So on those lower end phones, even simple interactions can lag or fail. High quality graphics or animations can become a barrier rather than an enhancement. So we recently worked on a sports community website, where we saw an audience base of children using the parents' phone, or even connecting to their uncle's Wi-Fi through their phone. Users save for offline before traveling to events because of connectivity issues. And then from an environmental standpoint, some of these games and events they were going to were at midday. So, there were lots of lighting challenges as well. I guess the big one that we kind of talking about here was around real estate. When we're choosing easy to use, elegant or scaled buttons, they would actually on those lower end of the scale resolutions hinder the experience, because it just created more scrolling. We had to go in and define, lots more breakpoints in our designs. We had to design for lower end. We stripped away stuff for connectivity and data savings. We designed for midday, as I said. And then even our file formats, we went away from JPEGs and PNGs and went to WebP and WebM for all of our formats for savings. These all allow for better performance. Allowing our users to engage with our content a lot easier, less scrolling, quite a few assumptions we had going into these worlds that the users would be able to use our designs if we're using the normal ways of working, quickly dispelled.
Ironically, on the other end of the spectrum, we had a user group that suffered from impaired vision, so larger text was very, very important to them. And for some reason, a lot of them also use smaller screen sizes, which put us in a tricky position. So in this scenario, we prioritized larger text and touch areas, allowing some of the text areas and elements to increase up to 200%, obviously adding a lot more scrolling. But we also didn't want to lose legibility, because if you've got fixed size items and you increase the text size too much, then you end up with only being able to display 2 characters in that fixed size. So things like buttons, we limited how much increasing we could do for these items. So finding a nice balance is really useful for your use case as well, in understanding what parts is more important and what parts to increase. The next contradiction we kind of face quite often with our project is personalization versus predictability. We all know how personalization can make an interface feel a little bit more dynamic or tailored to the individual preferences, and it's a little bit more exciting to visit, so you tend to have people coming back more often. But constantly changing layouts can make things difficult to find, leading to frustrated users, and predictability make things boring. So for the less tech-savvy users, or even those with a bit more cognitive impairments, they benefit more from predictability. So for an app design for a user group that have higher than average levels of cognitive impairments, we focused on building a familiar experience over the everything is always fresh approach to kind of take away the guesswork for them. So consistent layouts led to a lot higher engagement and daily active users, and it provided a strong sense of control for these users. So for certain user groups, predictable layouts offer security and understanding, outweighing the excitement of personalization.
I think it's that thing around going on Netflix and not being able to find that program you watched the day before. Nice. The next contradiction, is it better to use image-heavy, engaging layouts, or is it better to lean towards the plain and simple and easy to navigate? Image-rich designs can add visual interest. They can be more engaging and help give that experience a bit of life and break up dense lots of information. However, users with cognitive impairment or low vision may find a simplified, plain design easy to process and interact with. Too many images can create unnecessary distractions and make it hard to discern between items. Go to the next one. So going back to a recent project, the one I talked about before, the project with kiosk in the airport. With the vast array of users with impairments that we had to design for, we had a real challenge on our hands to create an experience that was easy and fast to get through, as well as engaging and pleasurable as well. So what do we do? Create an experience that prioritizes accessibility without sacrificing usability. We came up with a solution that had to be overly simple. Time was of the essence. Lighting restrictions in terms of highlighting situations, and also thinking back to that audience of sight impaired, blind, dyslexic, and there's quite a few varied audiences of differing impairments that we had to design for. So we really had to pick and choose our moments for engagement. Photography was really used at the bare minimum. We allowed users to focus on essential tasks without distraction. Really leaning into that clean and accessible design. Also, familiarity is another key principle we brought in. Consistent control bars, top and bottom. Try not to change any convention in that space. Navigation is super important. Color. Too much color can actually, for low vision, could make the experience a little bit muddled and hard to kind of navigate through or easy to see. Talking about straying when using dark color for low vision users, the ability to navigate and orientate themselves was key. So I guess, highly engaging designs are helpful to make your experience unique and enticing. However, when in an environment like a high stress area like an airport, it's not the best idea to create lag in that user experience. Speed and ease of use is the goal, not long use times. Next, real film video, versus illustrative instructional animations. We recently did, talking about that same project, we had to create instructional help videos of how to use the experience. Our first assumption was film video was the one to do because not only was the audience vast and wide, there was language barriers, there was users could be coming from any walk of life. So, our initial assumption was that faces, people, friendly experiences would help instruct a lot better and be more engaging than something that's a bit cold and illustrative. So we took that into user testing, showed our users that those tested those two experiences between our audience base, and what we quickly found was the more simple and illustrative resonated better, which was totally against what our initial thoughts were. From a contrast point of view, users with low sight found it really hard to see filmed video because there was too much contrast and too little contrast. Sorry. Moving images and tones and those types of things was hard to discern when you're trying to instruct in something really simple. So that was an interesting one where the user testing really came to life. That simple animations was the way to go, despite your initial assumptions. Some myths dispelled there.
I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but iOS and Android have settings that can reduce or even disable the motions or the motion designer animation in its operating system. They do this because motion-sensitive users may find animations or transitions disorientating or even uncomfortable. But animations is also a very fun and effective way to provide cues, visual interest, and engaging content. So showing users where to look or helping them orientate themselves when navigating through the different steps. For the same app that was targeted at the 75-plus-year-olds mentioned earlier, we implemented animated transitions and interactions that offered this kind of subconscious visual guidance when they move from step 1 to 2 or around to just navigate through the app. Showing things move from one point to another. So this approach helped orientate them, this group, and they tend to be more unfamiliar with technology, as mentioned. But it does little to limit the discomfort for the motion-sensitive users. So it just shows that based on user research and test, it can indicate that the added visual guided benefits for one user group can have a very drastic negative effect on a different user group. And you have to understand your user to make the informed decisions to choose the correct approach.
Nice. Thanks. So ultimately, we kind of have two choices. We can either stick to those checklists and produce functional one-size-fits-all design, or we can go deeper. Prioritize those specific user needs, listen to users, find those little nuggets of information you would never have known had you not actually put a screen in front of someone. What are those environmental challenges? What are those device challenges? Those should all come into the final solution. How else would you create something truly meaningful? Checklist, standards, rules, laws are valuable. We see them as a great starting point, as we've described in some of these projects we've worked on. However, they're not unbreakable. They can be a starting point, but after you get some themes and understand your users a bit better, you can massage those rules. By focusing on those specific groups, environments, devices, elements, we often find that the better solution is eventually created once you've had that wider view. Going back to the U and UX, inclusive design doesn't mean trying to please everyone. It just means designing with empathy and intention. Our approach here at Journey is kind of prioritize those user needs, that user data, those insights over rigid guidelines. We see those as a starting point, not the ultimate goal. Encourage you to do the same. Reframe inclusivity is, designing those deep resonant experiences once you've understood your user. Nice. And so as you go forward, ask yourself, who are you really designing for? Are you designing in an effort to meet every requirement, or is it a reflection of deep understanding of user needs? We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions. Thanks for being part of this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. I encourage our audience to think about their questions, and please type them into the chat, or you can also raise your hand and we can have more of a discussion. I do have two questions that have popped up as you guys were talking. Did you find it difficult with stakeholder management when you were kind of presenting these different options of sleek design that might not fit their users, but like how did you balance that kind of interaction?
I think the thing with managing stakeholders and presenting projects is it's very hard to argue with real data. If we take our clients on that journey and bring them through the research and actually show them real quotes and real conversations that we have with our users, so that can help guide ourselves as well as the clients. It's always a hard one because you're always balancing up, the business needs as well as the user needs. Not sure, Johan, if you've got anything to add to that.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. It is very hard to argue backed up information that's based on tests rather than presumptions or, the list on the internet tells me I need to do this.
We always come in with some assumptions to all projects, and then the more we talk to people, the more that shapes the eventual solution. It can actually be totally different from what we initially dreamed up, which is great because then you're creating a better experience. It should be a lot more targeted to that end user. And I think it also helps the client. The more user testing you can do earlier, the less likely it is that you're going to fail in the real world.
Wonderful. A question popped up that actually feeds into this beautifully. How did you do your user testing of your designs? And how did you go about finding participants?
Well, we kind of use a whole range of different techniques when we're doing user testing. In terms of recruitment, we've used a few different agencies before. We actually used a specifically inclusive agency for one of our projects to get in touch with some of those higher needs audiences. So it can be really tricky to find if you have a brief where your audience is sight impaired, blind, dyslexic. It's quite hard to find. We found a really great agency that we worked with. I can't remember the name, but they actually gave us a whole host of unique needs users, which was awesome, and we'll continue using them. And then we've done things like online recruitment. We've recruited friends and family as well. Especially when those audience groups are super vast and wide, you can talk to people, you just got to watch out a little bit for that bias.
I think another important thing to note here is when you do user testing to always try and simulate the real life environment as much as possible. You're not going to get a lot of insights if you test a mobile app on a desktop screen on the internet, because that recognition patterns just aren't there. Somebody holding a mouse just doesn't think about the drag or the swipe functionality that they could be using on a mobile device, for example.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Even designing for screen readers, actually seeing real users come in who are totally used to screen readers was an absolute eye-opener for us. They experience the web in a totally different way to what you'd think. So that was really cool.
Yeah, just to echo that, and what I've posted in the chat is we did a talk with Jamal, who basically demonstrates how he uses a screen reader, and the speed at which it talks is just ridiculous. Like it was jarring for me the first time I heard it. And then there's a link to an accessibility kind of recruitment and user research that we've had experience with as well. Yes, awesome. We've had another question pop up. How do you see design offerings evolving over the next year? Do you think all these points will hold strong in the future?
I assume you mean these kind of principles we've brought into our everyday life. I mean, you know, we're starting to, if I assume that's the question, we're bringing these new standards into every project. All of these learnings for these vast and wide audiences, we're trying to update our baseline constantly. So I think the baseline is always changing with the advent of more devices and user needs. I think everything is changing. Everything's changing so rapidly with the advent of AI. You know, I think you just have to keep up with the times, otherwise you'll be left behind, to be honest, in terms of you know, your approach. It should always change. So in terms of will it be relevant next year? Not sure.
I would almost add that I think the focus on user-based design will probably increase because with the work of AI, things are probably going to get more and more one-size-fits-all as the AI pretty much just recommend what to do. And if that's going to be your approach, you will probably see a lot of your users fall through the cracks that have the more specific needs.
Thank you. I've got one final question, unless any more pop up in the chat, so please put your thinking caps on. When you were talking about the real film versus animation, can you go into any more depth about that kind of user testing experience? Because I was surprised that the video of a real person wouldn't perform as well as the animation.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the type of content we were creating, it was an instructional video, very simple instructional, you know, 4-step process of how to use the kiosk. We had to keep it simple. So when you actually were filming, showing filmed content, you know, with foreground background, even my background here, you can see it's not high contrast. So users with sight impairment would struggle to see me instructing. So real world filmed footage didn't perform as well because of a lot of contrast requirements, high contrast requirements. So animation that we moved to was white with dark, you know, foreground background, super high contrast and super simple too, because I guess it was about not only, you know, designing something that makes sense to me, but also someone in other languages as well. That gives a bit more color to that.
Yes, and a follow-up question, which I was also going to ask, which is so funny. Thank you, Anna. When you were doing those instructional images, did you provide an audio overlay for the illustrative images or a written script for the screen readers? I think it was for the kiosk in the airport. You might not, like, audio might be an issue.
So we had to design with what's it called? aux or audio in. Audio was not we had to design without audio. So annotations and the written word was key there. So that was the kind of playoff we were doing in terms of busy, you know, environments like that. Sound's not really a massive driver for someone learning. It's almost if they need it and they can put their kind of headphones in. If not, it really relied on the actual instructive animations. That was what was doing the hard lifting for us, was the movements and the instructional visuals rather than sound.
Wonderful. I believe that's kind of the last question that has popped up. There has been a request for me to share the links, and I will do that when we share the video recording.
Nice.
Yes, thank you both so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Very informative and enlightening.
So thanks, guys. That was awesome. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah. You're getting some love in the emojis.
Oh, nice. I can't see them, so I'm missing them all.
They're floating up like magic. There they go. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us. To both our presenters and attendees, I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days to join us. So thank you again. See you later.
Bye, guys.
Yeah.